Errol Flynn was born with the name Errol Leslie Thompson Flynn on June 20th, 1909 in Hobart, Tasmania, which is in Australia. Flynn's dad was Theodore Thompson Flynn, who was a really respected scientist who studied ocean animals and was also a teacher, and his mom was Lily Mary Young. Even when he was really young, Flynn didn't like following rules or doing things the normal way. Instead, he was restless and loved adventure, and this would be a big part of his whole life and his acting career. He got kicked out of several schools because he misbehaved a lot. Flynn was a rebel way before that became part of what people knew him for. Before Hollywood found him, Flynn was already living a life that sounded like it came straight from a movie. When he was a young guy, he had all kinds of crazy jobs. He was a sailor, someone who digs for valuable rocks and metals, a boxer, and someone who watched over a farm in Papua New Guinea. These experiences made him really tough and gave him this cool, rough charm that audiences would fall in love with later. His first time trying acting was in Australia, where he was in a cheap movie called In the Wake of the Bounty in 1933, where he played a character named Fletcher Christian. Even though his acting was kind of rough, Flynn had this natural thing on camera that you couldn't ignore, and soon Warner Brothers noticed him and brought him to Hollywood. Flynn became a superstar really, really fast. In 1935, he was in a movie called Captain Blood, and that film turned him into a huge star overnight all around the world. With the way he moved like an athlete, his big friendly smile, and his easy confidence, Flynn became the new version of a sword-fighting hero for his generation. He kept winning with a bunch of famous movies, like The Charge of the Light Brigade in 1936, The Adventures of Robin Hood in 1938, The Seahawk in 1940, and Dodge City in 1939. These movies made everyone think of him as the perfect heroic adventurer. He was brave, romantic, honorable, and super charming. When he acted with an actress named Olivia de Havilland, they became one of Hollywood's most loved acting pairs, and you could see the warmth, humor, and respect between them on screen. But Errol Flynn was way more than just a guy swinging swords and being romantic. He was actually a really good actor who sometimes didn't get enough credit, and he really wanted people to take him seriously beyond just being a handsome movie star. In movies like They Died with Their Boots On in 1941, Gentleman Jim in 1942, and later The Sun Also Rises in 1957, Flynn showed he could be deep, vulnerable, and dramatic. He also shocked the critics with how good he was in That Forsyte Woman in 1949, proving he could do more than just action hero stuff when someone gave him the chance. When the cameras weren't rolling, Flynn lived just as wildly as the characters he played. His personal life was famously messy, with several marriages, scandals, and a reputation for going way overboard with everything. His heavy drinking, wild lifestyle, and not knowing when to stop really hurt his health and his career. Legal problems and public controversies made things even worse, and often people forgot about how good of an actor he really was. Even with all these problems, Flynn was still magnetic and interesting right up to the end. In the 1950s, when Hollywood's best years were fading and his health was getting worse, he kept working, a lot of times in smaller movies and films made in other countries. His later performances had this tired, thoughtful quality that made them feel hauntingly real. Flynn himself seemed to know that his legend and his problems were tied together, and he once said with his usual honest bluntness that he had lived life at top speed, no matter what happened because of it. During his life, Flynn got married 3 times, and each marriage showed a different part of his crazy journey, with romance, glamour, heartbreak, and a lasting impact. His first marriage was to a French actress named Lily Demita, and they got married in 1935 right when he was becoming super famous. Their relationship had old-fashioned elegance and Hollywood craziness. But it was also really strained because Flynn's career was demanding and he couldn't sit still. They had one son together, Sean Flynn, who was born in 1941. Sean would later have his own incredible and sad life as someone who took photos during the Vietnam War. Even though Flynn and Damita once loved each other, they got divorced in 1942, ending a relationship that the newspapers had been following closely. Just 1 year later, Flynn married Nora Eddington, a smart and lively actress who became his second wife in 1943. They had two daughters together, Deirdre, born in 1945, and Rory, born in 1947. For a while, Flynn seemed to be settling down into family life, trying to balance being a dad with his movie career. But the pressures of being famous, his personal problems, and his increasingly messy lifestyle were too much. The marriage ended in divorce in 1949, another part of Flynn's complicated personal story coming to an end. In 1950, Flynn got married for the third and last time, choosing an actress named Patrice Wymore to be his wife. This marriage lasted until Flynn died too young in 1959, and they had one daughter, Arnella Roma Flynn, born in 1953. Even though Flynn's health was getting worse and he had more and more personal struggles, the relationship stayed together through the last years of his life, showing a little bit of stability in all the chaos around him. Flynn's impact didn't stop with just his own generation. Through his daughter Rory, he became the grandfather on the mom's side of an actor named Sean Flynn, who later became famous for starring in a popular TV show called Zoe 101. In this way, Errol Flynn's influence went way beyond just his own acting career, continuing through his kids and grandkids, reminding us that behind the legendary image of the dashing Hollywood bad boy was a complicated family man whose story still matters many years after he died. In the dark, shadowy hallways of Hollywood's golden age, very few stars showed off tough guy bravado as completely as Errol Flynn. He was a sword-fighting hero, reckless and stubbornly charismatic. Flynn put out an image that the studios were happy to sell to everyone, the ultimate guy that all the ladies loved. But behind that carefully created myth was a much more complicated emotional world, one shaped by secrets, survival, and a studio system that demanded everyone act the same rigid way. One of the longest-lasting rumors about Flynn's private life is his supposed romantic connection with another MGM star named Robert Taylor. Back then, if such a relationship was admitted to, it would have destroyed both men's careers. Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s had morality rules, studio spies, and an unspoken but harshly enforced rule: being queer must never be visible. Flynn himself, in things he said later, reportedly talked with tired irony about the life he was expected to perform. "They didn't want a man," he said to have remarked. "They wanted a legend, one that never contradicted itself." Robert Taylor, who was trained by MGM to be the picture of refined masculinity, faced the same pressures. The studio set up relationships, marriages, and publicity events to make his straight image stronger. Any difference, even just a rumor, was treated like a threat to millions of dollars in ticket sales. In that environment, emotional closeness between two men could only exist in silence. Flynn understood this deal really well. "You learned early what could be talked about and what could only be lived," he said. "Hollywood wasn't interested in truth, it was interested in consistency." If Flynn and Taylor did share a private relationship, keeping it secret wasn't just what they preferred, it was protection. Both men had highly publicized relationships with women, not always because they wanted to, but because they had to. These relationships worked like armor, protecting them from suspicion and letting them move through public life without being challenged. The secrecy was really hard on them. Flynn, who often used jokes to avoid looking at himself too closely, admitted what that double life cost. "The hardest part wasn't hiding," he admitted. It was pretending the hiding didn't change you. What people today need to understand is that this wasn't being fake. It was survival. In a time when careers, contracts, and even freedom could be lost in a day, silence was often the only choice. The studio system rewarded people who did what they were told and punished honesty. By the time people's attitudes started to change many years later, Flynn was long dead, his public image frozen in old movies. But now, looking back at Hollywood history allows room for seeing things in a more complicated way. Finally, the idea that Flynn's life had emotional complications beyond the official story doesn't make his legend smaller. It makes it bigger. As Flynn himself once summed up with his usual bluntness, "I lived the life they needed me to live. The rest belonged to me." Today, that quiet truth speaks louder than the myths ever did. By the fall of 1959, the dazzling life Errol Flynn had once lived, marked by sword-fighting heroics on screen and a reckless hunger for pleasure off it, had shrunk down to a grim reality of debt, failing health, and disappearing money. He used to be one of Hollywood's biggest stars who made the most money, but now Flynn was struggling just to keep his head above water financially. He was so desperate that on October 9th he got on a flight to Vancouver, British Columbia, hoping to work out a deal to lease his beloved yacht, Zaka. The boat, which had been a symbol of his romantic wandering spirit for a long time, was now less of a luxury and more of a way to get money. The man he hoped would save him was a businessman named George Caldo, and Flynn was traveling with a 17-year-old actress named Beverly Odland, whose presence would later add a haunting layer of controversy and tragedy to Flynn's final days. What started as a regular business trip quickly turned darker. On October 14th, as Caldo was driving Flynn and Odland toward the airport for their flight back to Los Angeles, Flynn suddenly started complaining about intense pain shooting through his back and down his legs. The pain was bad enough to worry the people with him. Realizing that something was seriously wrong, Caldo turned the car around and drove to the home of Dr. Grant Good. Flynn, who used to be known for jumping around movie sets with athletic ease, now had trouble just climbing the stairs of the building, a disturbing sight for a man whose public image had been built on strength and physical toughness. Dr. Good examined Flynn and decided that the pain was probably caused by degenerative disc disease and spinal osteoarthritis, which are illnesses that made sense for Flynn's age and hard-living past. To help with the suffering, Good gave Flynn a shot in his vein of 50 milligrams of Demerol. As the medicine started to work and the pain went away, Flynn relaxed, and his voice got more animated. In a touching, almost movie-like moment, he started talking at length about his past, his adventures, his triumphs, his life lived at full speed. The people there listened as the once mythic star drifted backward through his memories, revisiting the very experiences that had made him famous and infamous. Interestingly, when someone offered him a drink, Flynn said no, an unusual thing for a man whose excesses were legendary, and something that now seems like a quiet, sad footnote to his final hours. Afterward, Dr. Good massaged Flynn's legs in the bedroom of the apartment and told him to lie down and rest before going to the airport. Flynn reportedly said he felt ever so much better, words that would soon have a heartbreaking irony. About 20 minutes later, Beverly Odland went to check on him. Instead of finding Flynn resting, she found him unresponsive. Panic followed. Dr. Good immediately tried emergency medical treatment, and Flynn was rushed by ambulance to Vancouver General Hospital. Despite how fast they responded and how hard the medical staff worked, Errol Flynn never woke up. He was pronounced dead later that evening at just 50 years old. The official findings painted a sad picture of a body worn down by years of strain. The coroner's report and death certificate said the cause of death was a myocardial infarction, commonly known as a heart attack, brought on by coronary thrombosis and coronary atherosclerosis. Contributing factors included fatty degeneration of the liver and partial cirrhosis, conditions bad enough to be formally written down. After his death, it was also reported that Flynn had previously gotten treatment for genital warts, a detail that showed how much his health had quietly gotten worse behind the glamorous front. Errol Flynn's death marked the end of one of Hollywood's most flamboyant and turbulent lives. He left behind a son, 2 daughters, and both of his parents, along with a legacy that's still as complex as it is captivating. Once the picture of cinematic adventure and masculine charm, Flynn died far from the spotlight, brought down not by one single dramatic event, but by years of excess, exhaustion, and decline. His final journey, meant to rescue a failing fortune, instead became the closing chapter of a legend whose life burned brilliantly and briefly against the golden age of Hollywood.